What is ludonarrative dissonance? The ludo part comes from the Latin word ludus, which means game. So we can break up the term into gameplay and narrative dissonance. This term discusses the contradiction between the themes of the narrative and the themes of the gameplay in a video game. Let's use BioShock as an example. The narrative of BioShock is a critique of random objectivism. Andrew Ryan's opening monologue represents this core idea the game is criticizing.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
The game's narrative asserts that the society of everyone acting in their own self-interest cannot function. However, the game's gameplay is all about self-empowerment. In the gameplay, the player kills other people to obtain new weapons and powers. Neither the gameplay nor the narrative in isolation is bad. There are plenty of great games criticizing selfishness or about player empowerment. But these two themes contradict each other in BioShock. The game's gameplay and narrative are dissonant, so the game is ludonarratively dissonant. Additionally, it is important to assert that ludonarrative applies to the themes of the game, not plot holes. If a player causes a character to act uncharacteristically during gameplay, it is not ludonarrative dissonance unless there's a thematic conflict in these actions. Conversely, there is the opposite of ludonarrative dissonance, where a game's narrative and gameplay fit together and reinforce each other. There's a strong lack of consensus as to the naming of this antonym. I've seen ludonarrative harmony, ludonarrative cohesion, ludonarrative synchronicity, and ludonarrative consistency. However, I will be using ludonarrative harmony because that is the term I hear the most often. There's a lot of debate over the merits of ludonarrative as a term. However, regardless of whether people reject or accept the term ludonarrative, games still convey meaning through it, often unintentionally. Without the tool of ludonarrative, audiences lacking the way to describe this meaning already present in games and how this meaning is created. When ludonarrative harmony is better recognized and plotted by critics and audiences, developers will be encouraged to put more care into their employment of ludonarrative, creating better experiences in their work. Therefore, ludonarrative is a valuable term and its use should be encouraged. However, there are many dissenting opinions to this claim. Brett Makedonsky argues that it is impossible to implement ludonarrative harmony into a game. He claims that since players have control over the gameplay through play, they can engage in actions that contradict the narrative at any time, causing developers to be unable to make the gameplay and narrative support each other. The only solution would be to give the players control over the narrative as well. However, the flaw in Makedonsky's argument is that players don't have complete control over the gameplay. Developers can incentivize intended play and disincentivize contradictory play. A player could spend their entire time playing a game walking in circles, but we would call this playing the game wrong, and not see this activity as representative of the game's themes. The goal of a ludonarratively harmonic game is to have the intended gameplay align with the themes of the narrative. YouTuber Jim Sterling argues that ludonarrative dissonance is a term that is
a very clever sounding word, isn't it? And that means it's easily abused by people who don't want to own their distaste of a particular thing and would rather mask their preferences in pseudo-intellectual warbling.
However, if some people utilize the term incorrectly, the situation Sterling describes, that does not make the term invalid, only their usage of it. Chris Franklin, in his video about ludonarrative, critiques the term.
Like, story and play both exist in service to the overall work, not as two forces in conflict with one another. So why do we frame them that way?
Franklin is arguing that the approach segments video game analysis, that encourages story and gameplay to be seen as separate or conflicting forces, instead of the holistic works that those who employ the term ludonarrative aim for. However, this reason is in large part why the term ludonarrative harmony is used, to describe these holistic instances where games are successful and encourage them. Gameplay is one of the core things that distinguishes video games from other mediums. In order to make full use of the medium, games must weave their stories and narrative together to create better experiences. The idea of ludonarrative allows developers a clear way to weave these traits, and it is extremely useful as a result.